Best of luck to all teams. Let's just all be respectful to each other. We'll all be fine. Thank you. Fast speaker whenever you are. Oh, I have to time. I don't have a phone. I'll time you as well. Yo. Yeah. Fast speaker whenever you are ready.
Hello. I'll begin my speech in three, two, one. Okay, on clarity, Chair, we must understand the burden of team opposition, right? They need to come and show us why child online safety campaigns necessarily should focus more on controlling what they do rather than focusing more on empowering them. Notice, for this particular debate, we need to understand the character of the children. The characterization here is that children in and of themselves, these are people who struggle for exposure, right? What that means that they want to know how to engage with the online kind of digitalization that is happening also at school. We need to consider the fact that we are living in a digital era. What that means that there's that computerization and digitalization of every aspect, and then that kind of buy-in that is existing also at school. Notice then what it means that these kind of children, in as much as parents try to control them, they have the defiance when parents dictate their actions. What it means that if you prohibit me from using WhatsApp because you feel like WhatsApp is going to expose me to online damages, it then looks like I'm going to work hard to know the reason as to why you're making me not to use WhatsApp. Notice the condition of focusing more means that you are going to prioritize the other over the other. The setting of the debate there and then means that the characterization of empowering here looks like we're going to teach them the online privacy and data security, but then secondly, we're going to teach the children how necessarily to bounce back from the negative effects of the online harms. Notice if you tell me that when I'm cyberbullied, I can necessarily do this to solve my kind of issue. Notice this becomes important because you provide me with the lifelong skills that are going to reach the pervasive demands of the digitalization era. Notice then what that means is that at a point in time where team affirmative does not then show us how that at a point in time where the team affirmative has to show us how controlling what children do online is necessarily going to help them. It's necessarily going to help them to combat the kind of damages that are happening on status quo. Then they don't stand in this solution. Two arguments that I'm going to argue here. One is that the child autonomy. Notice what it means is that the children in and of themselves, these are kind of people that want to get the kind of respect from their children and the kind of trust. Notice on team opposition, there is no trust on that side because notice at the point in where I'm a child and you're controlling what I'm going to do, it then looks like I am going that kind of relationship is going to get disorganized because you don't give me that kind of inherent relationship. The reason as to why I should be or I should prefer your world. Notice then, empowering them is going to help them to engage with the online harms. Why this becomes important is that they are going to be able to combat even in the long future. Notice the kind of world we are living in is that when you empower a child with digital literacy, they're necessarily going to understand the aspect and they're going to prepare themselves for the kind of jobs that have not even been evident. Notice when you don't have this kind of child autonomy, the children then are neglected to things like vulnerability to significant harm. The significant harm here is the cyberbullying, the misinformation, and the online scamming. Right? At a point in time where opposition has the burden to show us how controlling these children, how this are going to help them combat in the long run. Right? They must then show us why that mechanization is preferable to compare to our mechanization. Notice then, when we control children, it then looks like you're going to restrict them of what they are going to be accessing online. But then secondly, at the end of the day, you're going to have
Right. I start my speech in three, two, One, first response to prop is to say this is actually basic, this is important for children to have lifelong skills. We think right now it's very important that we protect these children because after childhood you then have an incentive to choose your life, right? That is to say, I can choose probably to engage in pornography or I can choose not to engage in. Right now, I think it's the responsibility of all people as stakeholders, including parents, to ensure that whether you have an autonomy, you must have ability also to engage in a safe ground because that's like a responsibility. That's why you exist within society. Secondly, is the charge on nature on how these children are. These children, they say when you violate autonomy of children, they're most likely going to probably retaliate to parents. That alone shows that children don't understand why they're being stopped from engaging in that, meaning they lack judgment, that ability to judge. Meaning even when you empower them and teach them that, hey, this is how you fight hackers, because they lack that ability to judge and know what is right, most likely they're still going to succumb to these particular harms. We think that alone becomes a problem. Secondly, is the provision of lifelong skills. We think those lifelong skills are important, but at a point where they're exposed to pornography, sometimes they're compromised. Why? Because then you're going to compromise the interests of the lives and standards of how those children relate to this society. Meaning, even though they have those lifelong skills, what happens at that grassroots level is a problem. Meaning, you have people that don't even probably engage on emotional intelligence and whatnot. Why? Because they got exposed to pornography and all those kinds of things. Secondly, is the chart and how this helps them to bounce back from this act. Notice that we also want to engage with the nature of that actor. One, that actor is vulnerable, meaning they can easily be manipulated in that system. You've educated them on how to fight hackers, etc., etc., but because of how they are weak, because of their nature, they can easily be manipulated and succumb to these challenges. Secondly, is that emotional maturity. Even the fact that because you're trying to avoid them, they see parents as bad people. They don't have that ability to make informed decisions, even in an empowered world right now. Meaning, you're less likely even to achieve utility, even though you give them that ability. Secondly, is the lack of self-regulation. I think that's what empowerment essentially looks like. Do these people essentially have an incentive to regulate themselves? Because they want exposure, sometimes they engage even in those particular platforms because they want to know what takes place there. But the harm at the end of the day is not as a result of empowerment. We think that becomes a problem at the end of the day. Notice then how control looks like. One, it's like you have strict regulations. But Chair, let's understand that this is an online campaign. This does not mean you're trying to stop people from having phones. The campaign is on the stakeholders, the parents, those people, the platforms. What should be the priority? Control the kind of information they take in, but don't say that you're going to avoid them from existing within social media. What happens in empowerment is teach them how to fight hackers, teach them how to create safe accounts, but allow them to access any platform because you think that they're empowered. The question they have to answer is, what is the incentive that empowerment is effective? Do these children essentially have the incentive to take this empowerment? We think at a point where it is hard to measure the quantity of empowerment and how effective it is, you then focus on what then is. And that looks like control, regulate the content they take in, and see that at the end of the day, they achieve greater utility on those grounds. We're so proud to oppose.
I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Okay, what we necessarily get from opposition, they necessarily feel like lifelong skills are very important and necessarily concur to the fact that children are easily manipulated. Notice, when they come and talk about things like these children don't have the knowledge to judge or don't have the knowledge to like sort of not be susceptible to these effects or to these online frauds and things of the like. And we do agree that this is important. And why does that necessarily happen? We feel like at a point in time where I'm not able to know what something looks like and necessarily what it is and what it is not, that means I cannot judge. What empowerment necessarily looks like from characterization, we tell you that empowerment necessarily looks like you're giving people knowledge about how to engage with something, but not necessarily how something necessarily looks like. From first speech, they tell you, or like empowerment, we are looking at things like children being able to operate things like privacy settings, but necessarily children being able to identify the authenticity of information and necessarily being able to prevent themselves like from falling susceptible to these things, but then fourthly, to be able to solve those problems in case they're engaged with it. what we get from opposition side is necessarily they feel like when you control the kind of information that they access is then something that is very important because these children don't have that level of judgment. So we feel like from opposition, we give you that level of judgment, so we necessarily feel like it is more important for you to be able to empower them so that things like not being able to judge or things like manipulation cannot happen. I feel like I'm easily forged up or I'm easily manipulated with things like online frauds because I don't know what they are or necessarily I don't know how to engage them. So when I'm empowered to identify the authenticity of information, I'm able to know that this is a fraud and necessarily I know how to disengage it or I know how not to fall susceptible to such things. Why is that true? Ciao. I feel like child autonomy is very true because in this world, we need that level of self-dependency rather not independency that they try to foster for because they feel like children are going to remain in that started growth whereby you necessarily restrict them from getting things like pornography and other like. Notice, when you talk about things like empowering, we are not necessarily exposing you to things like pornography. We are not necessarily telling you that you're going to go and watch this. Notice, from first speech, they tell you focus necessarily does not exclude the other thing. When we tell you we are going to empower them, that does necessarily not mean that we don't control what they do. We feel it is more important to focus more on empowering people because it is further more important to know how to solve a problem other than you safeguarding me from actually engaging with that problem. Anyways, from to our second argument, we look at the stakeholders in this debate. The online safety campaigns, the parents, as they state, and then the children. How are they impacted by our side of the house? We feel like the corporate duty of the online safety campaigns is to be able to empower these children, but then secondly, to be able to proactively protect them. Emphasis, proactively protect these children. How does that not happen on the opposition side? At the point in time where you feel like you're focusing more on keeping me away from things like cyberbullying, on keeping me away from such things, and necessarily I don't know how to engage them, then you feel like you're a duty for you to be able to protect me from a problem before arrest.
I start my speech at C. A, B, C resolve. This kind of a debate where the concession comes in is on the point where they talk of the proactive measure, simply meaning they do not understand in how this entirely looks like. I think the proactive measure is a measure that most likely it solves the problem before it happens. I think that largely exists on our side because I think at a point in time where people engage in seeing things like pornography, we solve that by probably barring them, having the children and the stakeholders more engaged. That necessarily means we have all the social media platforms restricted, we have the content restricted, which necessarily means the ability even for these children to make the decision is most likely going to be good. At a point in time where you empower them, but give them the ability to choose what to do, the principle of choice then exists. At a point in time where you educate people, but still they have the ability to do whatever you tell them or not to. That becomes a problem on their side because most likely, even when you empower them, that becomes a problem because even with that empowerment, they're most likely going to get the capacity to manipulate whatever kind of systems you put up. That becomes then problematic because then you cannot regulate in whatever measures they exist. Best case scenario on their side is child autonomy. I think notice, even when child autonomy exists, there's something called society responsibility. I think at a point in time where you grant that child that particular autonomy, but then the responsibility the society has over that child. Notice, I think at a point in time where that child has the ability to make the decision, but the decision is most likely not going to affect the society positively, it then becomes a problem that exists on their side, not taken. One thing you need to understand, that their case entirely looks at empowering individuals, but then does not give us a guarantee that most likely we are going to have these individuals engage in the right things, most likely that you tell them to engage in. Because notice, I think even at this extent, empowerment largely exists, but the extent probably may vary. But even when it exists, the incentive that individuals do the right thing is most likely not there. I think even when individuals are in reference to climate change, individuals have been sensitized, but the incentive that they are most likely going to stop that does not exist. I think at a point in time where we have a law, probably we have a principle and regulation that states that this must not be done, and so though it should not be done, it's most likely to be more effective. On more of engagement, nature of the actor, we need to understand that a child is most likely an individual who's so curious, and besides that, has not the ability to make the judgment, not taken. Most things you need to understand that at a point in time when the person is so growing, does not have this adequate potential to make particular decisions. Even at that point when you empower them, the problem is that they are most likely going to make wrong decisions because the emotions are easily manipulated. That then becomes a problem that you entirely don't address on that side. The impact on society is that then we have increased online addiction because of the content that most likely is not going to be productive. But I think in our kind of analysis, we most likely expose the children to content that is productive. I think at a point in time we only expose children to content that looks like probably science and probably lessons in school. It is most likely because then we deter the problem before it happens. I beg to submit.
Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. A general consensus from both sides of the House is that for you to be able to win this particular level of debate, you must show how your focus is able to engage with that level of grassroots. What we get from opposition bench is pretty simple. They feel like when you control me, I am not going to be able to go for it. At the end of the day, they feel like they are able to engage the grassroots. I don't think you're able to engage the grassroots, right? The only reason I'm going for porn is because I want it or because I don't know why I should not be going for it, right? That looks like the only reason children in of themselves become susceptible to manipulation is because they don't have an idea as to why they should not be manipulated, right? It looks like when I don't know what science is and any random person comes and manipulates me to perceive that this is what science is, then I suppose that is how I'm going to flow, right? That looks like when you give these particular people that knowledge, when you give them that level of empowerment, then I don't think that these all other level of impacts that there then exist are going to happen. Notice, sort of like a principle of like engagement. You need to understand that when you train up children in this particular line, they are going to go with that. Why is that true? Because when your parent taught you how to bathe, I suppose you started bathing that day and you have always been bathing. At the end of the day, when you just control me and you do not show me why I should necessarily be engaging with these particular things, I don't think you're able to groom me as they feel like society is able to groom people. I don't think they're able to give that level of grooming and that level of engagement to the grassroots. But then secondly, on responsibility, we feel like these particular online platforms have that level of responsibility to be able to deter these particular things. That is to say that you controlling me till I'm the age of 18 when I can be able to do these particular things, right? You've kept me from porn for 18 years, but now I have the rest of my life to be engaging in the pornography. Why is that true? Because I don't know why I should be inherently engaging in that. That is to say that you are not able to create that level of sustainability that we show you in our world. But then also, thirdly, they feel like they have that level of guarantee, sort of like to problem solvency and to deterrence. We show you that the only way you can be able to deter a problem is if the people in of themselves know how they can be able to avoid that problem. That is to say that when you control me, you don't show me how I am being able to avoid all those online scams. You don't show me how I am able to avoid the pornography and particular things like that. That is to say that when you empower these children and you show them the particular line in which they should be able to avoid these things, right? We do not give them a platform that, oh, go and watch the pornography. We show you why you should not be watching it, and we show you how you can be able to deter yourself from those particular negative impacts that could come with it when you are able to sort of like begin engaging in those particular things. That's what we show you as empowerment. That is to say that we give you that level of guarantee of solvency. But then even in their world, they feel like because they are controlling children, they are deterring them from that thing, right? So let's take them on that. Even if you have deterred me for all this time, but you do not have that level of long-term sustainability that you are being able to deter me for like that, for continuity, right? For the rest of my life. The exclusivity there then is pretty simple on the sustainability, right? That is to say that you must be able to foster the level of long-term proper decision-making among these particular individuals. From first speech and second speech, we show you that when you are able to empower these particular individuals, they have the knowledge and they know how they are going to be able to avoid it. They come up and say that, oh, society must be able to groom people and those particular things, and they feel like children are necessarily susceptible to manipulation. The only reason they're susceptible to manipulation is because they don't know. That is to say that there is no way you're safeguarding me from manipulation when you are just sort of like protecting me from it. But then at the end of the day, I can still get manipulated because I don't have the information. So now there then, on the sort of like the question there then to them is, how are you going to be able to deter me from that long level of long-term sustained sort of like manipulation, even when I am no longer a child? I rest.
start in 3, 2, 1. Here are 3 things I'm going to show you in my debate. First, clashes and engagement. Secondly, why we win and why they lose. So first, on the clashes and engagement, they tell us that children are struggling for exposure. Understand, at a point in time where you struggle for exposure, you need to be exposed without getting into access with harm. So we feel like at a point in time where parental controls and restrictions and where people's content are filtered, we feel like these children do not get exposed to harm and they get harm, they avoid harmful exposure at the end of the day. But secondly, they talk of child's autonomy. Understand, for child's autonomy to be existent or for it to exist in an appropriate way, you do not have to infringe or you do not have to endanger the parental autonomy. The parent has to ensure the safety of his child. So at the end of the day, where you prioritize child's autonomy, then you're going to have conflicts of interest where the child is going to conflict with the parent. At the end of the day, we feel like you're not going to have sanity in that kind of world. But thirdly, they tell us that children do not have the idea of how manipulation looks like. That's why they need empowerment. Understand, the problem is that even if you bring empowerment, because they say that the children do not have the idea, at the end of the day, these children cannot make informed choices for themselves, and they even get distracted along the way, and they fall victims of harm or dangerous content. But understand, they lose this debate on 2 metrics. One, they talk of long life skills. But understand what happens with that, you assume that these children have the ability to make their choices. You assume that they know what they are doing, so you give them exposure to various apps. Now the problem with that is that these children get harmful content that is going to distract them. That is governed by the principle of choice. Even after empowerment, these children have the ability to choose what they want to do. You can empower them, but because of how interesting those harmful contents look like and how persuasive they are, those children still get distracted. At the end of the day, they do not protect these children, and and these children get access to what? Harmful content. Why? We win on 2 metrics. One, on the benefit of agency. We feel like we are able to achieve agency because these children do not access this harmful content at immediate time, because you're going to have filtered content, you're going to have parental controls. At the end of the day, this child does not see all that bad things. What we achieve in that, we achieve what we say in our second speech, that sanity. Now that comes in because these children do not get exposed to harmful content. Sanity comes in because these children then get exposed to educative content at the end of the day. But let's look at on the argumentation. We tell you 2 things. One, on the nature of the actor. One, these children are vulnerable and they can easily get manipulated. Why? Because their thinking is still small, their emotional maturity is still young. Even with empowerment, these children can be distracted. It is the reason as why after teaching children about drug abuse, they still abuse drugs. Why? Because their emotional intelligence is still low. That's why we do not need empowerment. We need to control what they do. At the end of the day, we get to protect them, and these children will not get exposed to harm. But secondly, we tell you that these children, the effectiveness of control. You realize that control is much more effective because you get to filter the content these children see. At the end of the day, they do not get exposed to harmful content. So proud to oppose.
all the teams here? Where's team Bujagali? Bujagali? Sorry. Where's team Bunnies? Team Crested Crane? Team Germany? Team Germany? Team Genius? Team Novice Trio? Team Mbasses? Team Berlin? Team Grizzlies? Team Elites? Team Elites? Team Elites? Guys, raise your hands or stand up. I can't see all the way to the back. Team... Okay, going again. Team Trojans, Catfish Account, Elites, Mogeza, Berlin, Grizzlies, Novice Trio, Mbasses, Winter Bunnies, Crested Crane, Germany, Genius, Ground Shakers, Pale Kings, Horizons, Avengers, Little Dinos, Ox, Rhetorica, Flipped. Okay, all the teams are here. Hi guys. So yeah, yeah, things are tight. I know, things are tight, but yeah, we'll get there. So no one has come to me yet. So I think there are no complaints. Seems everything is going fine. I think resolving your disputes is going well. Okay, so this is round 3. It's gonna be an open round. Sorry, it's gonna be an open round. So obviously, I'm gonna read the draw. Then they project the motion, and then you all will move to your rooms. Okay. So in room CP, and I'm very sure you all know your rooms by now. So in room CP, you're gonna have Avengers proposition. You're gonna have Berlin opposition. In room Maction, sorry, you're gonna have Winter Bunnies proposition, Elites opposition. In room 3, I hate numbers. Okay, again. Room CP, we have Avengers proposition, Berlin opposition. Room Action, Winter Bunnies proposition, Elites opposition. Room Lion, the Genius proposition, Novice Trio opposition. Room Bujagali, Grizzlies proposition, Team Mogeza opposition. Room Karuma, Crested Crane proposition.